I'm the ember that'll burn you down. I'm the water that'll drown you. I'm a star that's just a black hole now. I'm a terrifying danger. I'm a fruit decaying on the ground. I'm a swallower of anger. I'm the tree that falls and makes no sound. I make no sound. 'Cause if I stand up, I break my bones, and everybody loves to see them all unfold. Ain't nobody giving up, 'cause nobody gives a fuck. Stand up, I break my bones. Everybody wants what they just can't hold. There's nobody praying for me. I am fungus in the forest. I'm a lizard with a poison tongue. I'm the child in the manger. I'm the one who sacrificed his son. Rust is showing on my armor. I am wheezing like an old man done. I'm a product of my anger. I'm the bullet in a loaded gun. Stand up, I'll break my bone, and everybody loves to see them all unfold. Ain't nobody giving up, 'cause nobody gives a fuck. Stand up, I'll break my bones. Everybody wants what they just can't hold. There's nobody praying for me. If I stand up, I'll break my bones, and everybody loves to see them all unfold. Ain't nobody giving up, 'cause nobody gives a fuck. Stand up, I'll break my bones. Everybody wants what they just can't hold. There's nobody praying for me. There's nobody praying for me.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am now proud to introduce to you the one, the only.
evening and welcome to Goddesses and Devils with your hosts, Amanda McManus and Katie Kamara. Stopping by tonight is Christopher Wayne Fisher. So before we get started, here is a quick disclaimer. This show is for a mature audience only, and we ask that everyone please be respectful to one another. There is a zero, when I say zero, I mean zero tolerance for any forms of harassment, disrespect, vulgar comments. So if you feel that your comment may offend someone, then please keep it to yourself. During tonight's show, we will dive into the mind of serial killers. So please be advised, we do not in any way, shape, form condone acts of violence in any way here on Goddesses and Devils. But we will be speaking about things like that tonight. So this may trigger your own personal response, so be forewarned. So when we think of the human mind, we think of it as sets of faculties, including cognitive aspects such as consciousness, imagination, perception, thinking, intelligence, judgment, language, and memory, as well as non-cognitive, excuse me, tongue-tied. We have to do it like once or twice a night or it won't be fun, right, guys?
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
also talking about other aspects of it are non-cognitive. Christopher, you're absolutely right, right? So
Yeah.
non-cognitive aspects such as emotion and instincts that leads to subjective behaviors. The primary the primary competitors to physicalisms as the interpretations of the mind are idealism, substance dualism, and types of property dualism, and with some aspects of elemental materialism and anomalous monisms. With these attributes having a long, when I say long, infused tradition in philosophy, religion, psychology, and cognitive science, and what constitutes a mind, and what are its distinguishing properties, right? So our mind is this big matrix of, you name it, thoughts, processing, understandings, you name it. So that's pretty much what that whole blurb that I was just explaining pretty much defies, okay? Just to let you guys know, I know I threw out a lot of things. So sorry. Tonight's going to be a really educational show, like I was saying, and we're going to be talking about things from a psychological aspect. So with that being said, there are other things that can trigger cognitive reasonings to shift. Traumatic events in childhood play a big role in these shifts, such as abuse, neglect, and social, emotional, developmental delays. These events could have begun as early as infancy, all the way to your adolescence. Okay, so we're talking about traumatic events that took place in that particular lifespan of your life. However, this does not discredit one's actual intellectual abilities or understanding during these developmental stages. So one can possess a very high level of intelligence, but still that doesn't protect you from going through a traumatic experience event. So that's why an intellectual aspects of things are not usually affected by that. Okay. In many studies on serial killers, doctors and clinical psychologists have all identified patterns that they feel contribute to the shift in their cognitive reasoning, with the shift mainly occurring in early childhood years. When we look at known serial killer Ted Bundy, okay, we're not going to go into his crimes, and we're going to do that out of respect for the people that he did do these crimes to, so the victims and their families. We're not going to go and glorify him in any way. We're just talking about the psychological aspect of him. So their names will be mentioned, but like I said, I'm not going to delve into their heinous acts because, like I said, we do not condone that here. This is for an educational session, pretty much, so we can understand the mind a little better and the way that it plays effect on mental health in general.
Also,
So, like I
they
said, I'm
found,
not going to go into heinous details, but when we look at the killer, go ahead, Christopher.
they found some
Go ahead, Christopher.
imaging studies that there was developmental changes in people's psychopathy. I would love to share as well. In PET scans.
Yeah, yeah, just you could definitely share that. That's not an issue. Do you want to share that now?
Yeah, I'm gonna get the link and I'll share it out to the So, that would add to the body of our discussion.
Okay, so I'm going to continue then. So when we look at Ted Bundy, when he was evaluated after his arrest for his ties to multiple murders, Bundy suffered with interpersonal relationships that can be linked back to his mother and grandparents. So these were early childhood occurrences that linked these interpersonal skills and issues that Bundy was suffering with. So when we talk about interpersonal skills, we're talking about the way people communicate and they react to one another. So Bundy actually lacked that in early childhood, and they're saying that it's due to his relationship with his mother and his grandparents. Bundy did not have a father. He was quote unquote called a bastard by his family. He was subjected to a lot of different forms of verbal and physical abuse as well. So what it's been assumed is that because of these events, he did not develop interpersonal skills, and he became what you call a loner in a sense. He was learning on his own. He would be very isolated, cut off from the world, and this is why he continued this pattern with the way he interpreted conversations or interpreted interactions with people, right? So when they understood the fact that they linked this to the parents and the poor family dynamics caused Bundy, like I said before, to become isolated and unnurtured. This may imply that as infants, serial killers such as David Berkowitz, Joel Rifkin, and Kenneth, and I'm not sure if I'm going to say his name right, Bianchi, did not receive proper attention as they were given by their biological mother. So the mother failed to give them that nurturing and that caring attention that they need. So they didn't get that from their biological mothers. For even when they were adopted, many of them actually went through the system because their family and home dynamics was so horrid that they had to be their family, and they were a lot of times we strive for, to make those children that we adopt into our homes as comfortable and as welcome as possible. But we're talking about back in the 70s and 80s, where a lot of the times the individuals weren't screened fully. So you can definitely have taken a child out of an abusive situation and just throw them right into another. So that's where we see this, is that when they were actually adopted, they were not given that type of interaction that they needed, and that was a very vital part of their lives. And the subjective environments, they were not loving. Like I said, they were not caring, they were not stable, and they were not safe for any children. So when you have a child who's already suffering from a great deal of stress, going to another home where it's going to continue that stress, you can see that the child is not going to relate and understand. And what happens is the child starts adopting these sorts of behaviors, and they consider normalized. And that's when we start seeing the patterns. And so with that, if anything, these environments helped grow and harbor their blasphemous plans that they carried out in their adult life. This actually was the foundation to what triggered a lot of their beliefs, understandings, and why they decided to put into motion these plans of harming other individuals. Now, the individuals that they harmed, they would maim, torture, rape. They would do a lot of things to them. But like I said, I'm not going to get further into it out of respect for the families and the victims out there. But these acts, like I said, that's why I quoted it as blasphemous, because they were totally not in any way, shape, or form what a person should do to another person. These, a lot of the times, were plans that they developed prior. So these were precognitive thoughts that they were having, and then they were acting out the crimes, right? So this was premeditated murders, okay? So they thought through all this process before they carried out these things, right? And that's why I refer to it as blasphemous, because it really was heinous. So now I'm in no way or shape or form condoning or making excuses for these individuals. However, just like many suffering from forms of systematic depression, they did not get the help they needed. And that was the key. They did not get the help needed for their mental health to improve, to grow, to change, or to be stabilized in any way. They all showed signs of deviancies, and many partook in torture and animal abuse. So they would actually, a lot of these serial killers actually uh, pretty much confide in their doctors and the clinical psychologists that they were torturing and maiming animals. Now, they were not, a lot of them, some of them did though, but in childhood, they were not doing it to worship or to do anything occult wise. But as we see them growing, they started delving into the occult and things like that, where they would do sacrificial things. So this was a long pattern of unhealthy behavior that went unnoticed. Okay. Studies in childhood trauma linked to serial killers have revealed a number of significant statistics supporting the idea that mental and physical trauma may have long-lasting effects upon an individual. Now, this is also pertaining to individuals who went through these, traumatic events. You don't have to be a serial killer, like I mentioned earlier, to have gone through a traumatic event. Many individuals do that, but they seek the proper need in order to help them through these situations and help them process what was happening. Now, these individuals did not get that form of help in any which way, right? So the statistics showed that 42% of convicted serial killers suffered from physical abuse as children. 74% suffered from psychological abuse, and sexual abuse also seemed to be a prominent characteristic among serial killers. So a lot of them were being sexually abused. And 35% of these serial killers have witnessed at some point in their early childhood development to adolescence have witnessed sexual abuse. And 43% were actually sexually abused themselves. And this is all from a clinical psychologist whose name was Ensworthy, who published all these statistics in 1999. So if you look him up, you could definitely read his work. Another form of physical trauma linked to serial killers is head trauma. So we're seeing that these children, when they were being abused or when they were pretty much, quote unquote, being called clumsy, and they were, which what Christopher was mentioning earlier, it actually, when you have a significant amount of head traumas, we heard of several athletes who suffered from constant concussions who had a change in their cognitive processing and a change in their brain in general, right? So what happened was, when these individuals were being whacked in their head or whatever the case may be, these constant bumps started to make a change in their brain. And this is compensation from the constant head traumas. And now when you think about that, 29%, that's a high amount of people. We strive as parents to prevent our kids from getting hurt, harmed in any which way. We protect them from sports. But like I said, this was in a different era, and these were individuals who came from an oppressed situation. Okay?
I just want to add
we got to
something.
take that into consideration.
Yes, in this part of the brain here where psychopathy is near the back.
I do want to add to
From
that
point
too,
two.
because we all know that Ted Bundy was a psychopath.
Yeah.
And his typical traits as a psychopath was callous, exploitive, with blunted emotion, impulsive inclinations, and the inability to feel guilt or remorse. Now, in the world of psychology, we got to remember that the causes of psychopathy actually still remains a mystery. So we can still relate a lot of a lot of distinct traits to upbringing. The problem is that there are so many studies on this that are trying to say, well, you've been brought up that way, then you're going to be a psychopath. Well, there's a lot of sociopaths out there as well, and they're just as bad. But the thing is that there was a study that was done. It's called the Minnesota Study of Twins Reared Apart. Now, I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but the professor of psychology in Minnesota, Thomas Joseph Butchard Jr., led a study that has shown that psychopathy is 60% inheritable. And the reason why he said that is because the study of the twins indicated that identical twins in this case may not be genetically similar, as hereto assumed that only a couple of 100 mutations can take place in early fetal development. And the mutations are likely to multiply over the years, leading to vast genetic differences, and leaves the open possibility that the psychopathic traits are largely genetically determined. Now, if psychopathy is genetically determined, one should expect that there is an abnormality in the brain, not the immediate, and that would be the immediate source of the psychopathic traits. But the thing is with that is that brain scans actually revealed that psychopathy in criminals was actually associated with decreased connectivity between the amygdala, a subcortical structure of the brain that connects with negative stimuli. So you are onto something there as well. But the thing is that the negative stimuli that they're talking about does not translate into strongly felt negative emotion. That's my issue with the studies, is that we are trying to relate things to, upbringing, and that has a lot of emotionality to it, but it's not having anything to do with emotionality. And in this study, they're actually looking into brain abnormalities that have been concurrent and quite distinct over a period of time, which leads to, so it's kind of like genetic mutations. You skip it, and like in case of twins, you might skip a generation. But who knows? We could all be related to Jack the Ripper. We could all be related. There's going to be a sociopath or a psychopathic nature in all of us. It's just that whether or not our DNA structure is clicked on for it, who knows? And of course, upbringing influences the way that we think, feel, and do things, and so it enhances what we already have inside of us.
The other thing you'll find fascinating,
Right, exactly.
Katie, that part of the brain, the amygdala, and there's another complex right behind it, as you know, it's called the VTT. If that area is damaged and the corpus callosum is not connected there.
Well, the other region is the ventromedial prefrontal vortex.
Yeah,
that's what you're talking about, and that's where we get don't drop the baby. Yeah.
Right, shaken baby syndrome. Right.
They now call it, and I have to call psychopathy is now called ASPD now.
Well, see, and that's the thing. When serial killers actually started becoming more widely studied, should I say, and you had psychologists in there, you had clinical psychologists, you had anthropologists, you had different forms of, these individuals coming from different scientific backgrounds studying this. What they understood is that they only understood a very small portion of it because there was so much more to it. What a lot of them, and if you look into the Freudian beliefs and you look into Piaget's beliefs, nature versus nurture, and you look into all those past psychologists, without getting too much into detail because then we're going to be sidetracked. To them, they all studied these type of behaviors. So when we're looking at it, we didn't see a real big shift where we started incorporating all these different attributes to somebody's emotional or mental health. We didn't look at it from different aspects. We kept going back to the textbook, because if with the compilation of these factors, it's actually led sociologists to view psychopathic behavior as the brain's defense mechanisms. So when we look into that, I know Donna mentioned it too. When an individual is constantly at a heightened alert, right? They have their fight or flight constantly kicking in. What these sociologists have understood is that psychopathic behavior is the brain's defense mechanism to certain situations. So when we look at a serial killer and we look at all the different things and we look at all the material when we read their records and things like that, we're seeing certain things can be actually hereditary. Like you said, certain traumas to the head can cause a switch in That's why I said in the beginning that a brain is like a matrix of things. It is filled with so many different connections, so many different, ways that these messages and signals travel, right? So when we look at that and we see that, like I said, the compilation of these factors, we start seeing different scientific, people coming out to sit here and try to understand. And that's the whole key. Nobody is truly going to understand the mind of a serial killer, because a lot of them who would torture animals would do it for fun because they got this euphoric feeling from hurting people or animals and things like that. So when we look at it, we can only dissect it to a certain extent, and we only have a certain amount of material that's presented to us. And this is going back from the original arrest records when they had individuals. But then if you look at the advancement in certain things in clinical psychology, in the medical field in general, in mental health, when we start bringing it to modern day information, we can start seeing where these things actually can be agreed upon. And then anyways, our body and our brains compensate for things we are experiencing in everyday lives, right? One of the biggest problems we face in our modern day society, I'm talking about now, is a lack of mental health care that we are given, right? Meaning that when an individual first experiences signs of a mental health issue in childhood, sometimes a lot of parents or individuals out there, and this is completely true, will write it off and say, oh, he's just being a kid or she's just being a kid. However, these behaviors, ideations, or feelings can be a clear indicator that there is a bigger problem at hand. So that's why a lot of this study is pertaining to early childhood development versus the fact of an adolescence instead of their adult lives. Because what this information is stating is that during these times, they were neglected. So when they were pretty much acting a certain way, because of their situation, they were being ignored. And it's kind of like passing the buck, right? It's kind of like, well, the system failed them, and that's not what it is. What we see even in modern day society is the lack of mental health care that is provided to individuals in general. Okay, things like bullying have also been a common shared experience by many serial killers. A lot of serial killers had went through situations where they expressed they were being bullied, and it triggered them. And the bullying has also led, in modern day, has led to many individuals harming or ending one's life because of the constant, mental turmoil they're going through, right? They're going through so much emotionally, physically, they're feeling this pain. It's a whole pattern of things, right? So what serial killers had stated, and there was a high pattern of them, that they all were bullied either for they were bullied for many reasons, right? So when are we pretty much all going to wake up and realize that mental health plays a big role in everybody's lives? Mine, Christopher's, Katie's, my family, your family, everybody's family out there. Mental health is one of the biggest things, and that's pretty much why I'm doing this segment. Mental health is one of the biggest things that are ignored. We constantly see cuts in programs and things like that where it helps individuals, right? And back then they really didn't have this big, understanding, but they had some understanding to it. But because it wasn't an important understanding at that time, we're seeing that as a pattern. And that's my point here. Mental health is very much a big part of everybody's lives, right? And that's what we need to do. We need to wake up and understand that mental health plays when we're home, when we're in school, when we're parenting, when we're doing daily tasks. It's really important, and not many people realize how important it is. And it actually can do a better job with it. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. So a lot of the information that I was finding was that an institutionalizing and creating this structural beast, in a sense, which was a serial killer, which there's so many other factors out there. So a lot of information we can figuratively related, one directed. It's either up or down, left or right, but we're not looking at the middle. There's so much more information. There's so much more we can do, right? So, maybe you guys have been lucky, to live a life where you haven't experienced personal traumatic events like ones I met here, but I can guarantee that, you know what I mean? And that's the issue that we're seeing. With serial killers, however, they took these experiences to a whole new level. And then one can only question, is infancy or early childhood a key to the formation of a serial killer? The lack of nurturing, the lack of guidance, the lack of that need to learn or that need to know, all of that, is it really because of poor parenting skills, or is it something that we're not seeing, right? So when these individuals were interviewed, serial killers all expressed that they were isolated from their peers as children as well. So was social interaction also a contributing factor? Was the fact that they did not have a social group or a school to go to or anything like that, was the fact of being isolated and not given the chance to socialize an issue? See, and when we start really getting into it, we start seeing this. And many serial killers suffered from, normal problems. Weight problems, some had speech impediments, some had learning problems. But that was the thing. These individuals shared some commonality who have not have partaken in acts of violence. Way these individuals did. So this is information out there. There's so much information sharing that we all can do with one. In this particular, you guys definitely call it. I mean, it's and what other individuals are saying, as what I'm reading here, in my reach, is that many serial killers who I said suffer from weight problems, stutters, and learning problems such as dyslexia due to bullying. Many of these serial killers began harboring secret aggressive fantasies where they would actually think and play through these thoughts of them killing their bullies or maiming their bullies or torturing their bullies or creating a situation to where they can get back at the bully and publicly or physically harm these individuals. And, this is what we're seeing too, because they started harboring these aggressive fantasies. As stated by David Berkowitz, also known as the Son of Sam, it was a mysterious force working against me. He felt that something internally was working against him and driving him to commit these heinous acts. He goes on to say, I felt bothered and tormented. So it is clear that aggression, yes, aggression can begin in early childhood, right? Loneliness, as illustrated, may lead to the evolution of fantasies, and these serial killers pretty much is what they called this was their making, because they were frequently alone. This is what made them, was loneliness, isolation, aggression, fantasies of sorry, my son's dancing over here. Fantasies of them killing their, abusers. So with that said, I think we could take a short break. It is 7:37, and then we can get back, and hopefully we can have you guys call in. And while we're on break, I'm going to try to answer any comments that I find in chat underneath the feed here. Please share out. Please like and subscribe. Please make sure you subscribe to our YouTube and click that little bell so that way you can be notified when we share our archives or when we go live. So with that being said, I'm going to take you guys out to our first break. See you guys soon.
Another head hangs slowly, child is slowly taken, and the violence causes silence. Who are we mistaken? But you see, it's not me, it's not my family. In your head, they are fighting with their tanks and their bombs and their bombs and their drones. In your head, they are crying. What's in your zombie, zombie, zombie? What's in your zombie, zombie, zombie? Another mother's breaking, heart is taking over. When the violence causes silence, we must be mistaken. It's the same old theme in 2018. In your head, they're still fighting with their tanks and their bombs and
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much space. And when you're out there without care, yeah, I was out of touch. But it wasn't because I didn't know enough. I just knew too much. Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Does that make me crazy? Probably. And I hope that you are having the time of your life. But think twice. That's my only advice. Come on now, who do you think you are? Bless your soul. You really think you're in control? Well, I think you're crazy. I think you're crazy. I think you're crazy, just like me. My heroes had the heart to lose their lives out on the limb. And all I remember is thinking, I wanna be like them. Ever since I was little, it looked like fun. And there's no coincidence I've come. And I can die when I'm done. But maybe I'm crazy. Maybe you're crazy. Maybe we're crazy.
And we are back with Goddesses and Devils. So we do have a caller. Hi, how are you?
Thanks. Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm good. Sorry, I was on mute.
Jumping
I've been
on a
talking to myself.
trampoline.
It's okay.
I'm good. Chris just invited me on last minute, and I thought, cool. Yeah, I'm a psychologist who said the topic is psychopaths, or psychopathy, or sociopathy.
Serial killers, yeah.
Serial killers.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So what we're doing.
Yeah, that's
Sorry.
certainly a psychopath.
Yes, definitely.
It's called
I guess I
antisocial
wanted to make a distinction
personality disorder
between
now.
what's called a psychopath in like pop psychology. I don't mean to be like diminishing of that, but like, for example, the book The Psychopath Next Door, which is like kind of frightening. It's about a guy who like has a work interview and he leaves his dog home unfed, and instead of going back to feed the dog, he like goes to this work interview. But anyway, they say that there are like 25% of people are psychopaths like that, and that would include serial killers. But in the DSM, it's called antisocial personality disorder, and the prevalence is like 3%. So that's where I would really expect serial killers to land.
Right, and that's the thing with the DSM. We've seen it go through many different changes. I think we're on DSM-5 now, right?
Yeah.
And that's with better understanding, and the more we study into things like
I look crazy.
sociopaths, and something is we're starting to see. Yeah, my internet likes to go in and out. I'm sorry.
That's
My
right.
kids are on their electronics too, so that kind of cuts in and out.
Understandable.
What
I
I
have horrible service.
was saying is, I think we're on the DSM-5 now, and
That's
what
correct.
we're seeing is a more um, no, it's see that we're seeing a shift in things. We're seeing more of an umbrella effect with the DSM-5, where it's starting to cover a big variety of different forms of psychosis. And what people don't understand is, with the new advancements,
Amanda, you're really
whether
going
it's
in and out right now.
science, and we're starting to see better, and we're starting to see psychoses that are starting to come through, but they've always been in certain behaviors. So when we look at serial killers, I'm gonna call in, okay?
Absolutely. That's fine.
Yeah,
As you were saying, Daniel.
Yeah, let me. It's funny. In my freshman year in college, I took English composition. I got like a C minus, so I had to retake English, like with some, other kids. And this new English class, I got to pick any research paper I wanted, and I actually chose serial killers. So it's a really interesting topic to me. I remember all the book I had was by Robert O'Hare, who, came up with this psychopathy checklist, and I just remember distinctly he said the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath.
Yeah, and that's very, very true. I mean, the people who are deemed sociopaths, though, don't necessarily cause harm or commit violence to others. But the signs of sociopathy, they actually appear in childhood as a childhood conduct disorder. But that can evolve and predict violent behavior in adulthood. So it's not necessarily it doesn't necessarily have to do with upbringing, but it can have a lot of influence. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we do in adult life, in accordance to the environment that we're living in, because you can have the most beautifulest upbringing and still be a sociopath or a psychopath and still be a serial killer. So I mean, some of the research that is out there in terms of psychology, can be really, really defunct.
I mean, a few things to say to that. The prevalence of serial killers is just like so little. Like what percent of the population is a serial killer? There's probably like 20, in human history. So there's really not much you can conclude from looking at their family histories, whether or not that played a role or not, because the sample size is so small. But my guess is you don't become a serial killer with a happy family.
Well, yeah, that's very, very true. I mean, but I mean, there have been a very minuscule time, I'm not going to go all for the classical. I've been through abuse and trauma upbringing, because that's not going to discount the other people that have had a classic beautiful upbringing that still become serial killers, but they generally are related to serial killing as a sport because they're getting off. There's a sexual arousal that comes with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's different. So I think John Wayne Gacy, there was a recent special on him. So he was gay, and his dad hated gay people. And so he was constantly trying to please his dad, but constantly upset. So this is just what happened, is he would go on dates with men, have sex with them, and then feel so, horrible about the whole thing, he would end up killing them.
Yeah, and that's very true, because they're
killing like 50.
Yeah, because serial killers, homicidal serial killers, they kill based on their victims, and that is 1, availability, 2, vulnerability, and 3, desirability. So, I mean, they really go down to a T when it comes to targeting. I mean, you could have availability can be selected based on the lifestyle of that person, or whether, for instance, whether he or she, for instance, I'm just going to say from a female point of view, but for a single female who regularly spends her time alone in the evening, is available for a break-in and an attack. That's availability. Vulnerability is when they are there, then the victim themselves has a low self-esteem or is susceptible to trauma, i.e. the whole narcissist theory. Desirability may mean the appeal of the attractiveness of the victim itself, and it could be a multiple of numerous motivations behind that. That could be race, ethnicity, gender, age, body type, or just. But with those people that are actually serial killers that do go ahead and kill for sport, especially for sexual arousal. For those who do become sexually arousal when they kill, that is, or homicidal, I should say, that is because they lack something. Serial killers don't come about because they feel the desire to kill. They feel desire because they lack something within themselves.
Yeah.
And for instance, like sexual arousal means you could have a lack of, suffer from impotence.
Yeah, what something happened where they associate sexual arousal with, torturing and killing.
Yeah.
And how that happened, there's, a number of different ways. There's no way
Control,
to say. But
impotence.
Amanda's back.
Vulnerability. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like with kids who become serial killers usually have been torturing animals and killing animals, and I think that experience sort of primes them to be, sort of rewarded pleasurably by torturing and tormenting life.
Exactly. And I mean, these certain traits, though, of coming from the FBI. I mean, they've got a behavioral unit. Like we've seen TV shows like Criminal Minds that are really highlight the behavioral traits of homicidal serial killers. And I find it fascinating how they highlight sexual deviancies as one of the big motives of serial killers.
I mean, I wouldn't, base my knowledge of serial killers off of Criminal Minds.
Oh yeah. Oh, I know. But I find it fascinating how they bring it to the forefront to gain knowledge, even if it is a fictional thing. TV shows are always fictional, but there's some truth behind some of that.
There is, even for serial killers who don't explicitly experience sexual arousal during killing. I think they may unconsciously sort of associate, like some sort of orgiastic experience with the murder.
Well, in a light term, I've always, seen it as someone that's filling a void at some point. Filling a void.
Yeah.
And you see that a lot, not just in serial killers, but just filling a void in particular with many people who have suffered through upbringing, through any sort of type of trauma. When they either use their trauma for good or for bad. It's like playing victim. And when you play victim, there's all sorts of things like you've got the whole narcissist syndrome that comes out from that. Playing the victim can be very narcissistic.
Sure. I try to stay away from that whole narcissistic survivor abuse internet world, just because the terminology gets confusing for me as a psychologist.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, it can be very, very difficult difficult to determine any kind of motive, because I mean psychology is a field that is constantly evolving. I mean, you could have an MO. Let's just use me for example. You could have an MO on me, but it's not even listed. Do something that is completely deviated from what is known. Comment, and that's why I find it fascinating when you go into the criminality of a mind that is homicidal and that is serial in nature. It's too hard to determine what the factors really are, because like I said, you have people that are completely non-traumatized and completely traumatized by their lives.
Well, there's a range of trauma, I think. There's physical trauma and sexual trauma. And then there's just emotional neglect and sort of the withholding of love and any warmth and any approval whatsoever of the person, to the point that.
But again, when debating that theory as well, we also got to look at the mind of the person, because to the mind of a person, I mean, you could, and this is the debate that I have, and this is purely my opinion, is that, and I'm going to go back to the perfect life, the perfect upbringing. You're going to see two sides of a story, and it's going to derail everything that psychology knows. You could have the perfect upbringing according to your parents, but the mind of a child can think that they're neglected and not loved. Now the question is whether the child has had unfounded issues which has not been brought to life by a psychologist.
Of course, but there's also, it's clear when objectively some parents
that's true too. I mean, there's many different ways of looking at it, but I mean, there's always going to be two sides of a story. There's always going to be some sort of trauma in each and every one of our lives.
Parents who didn't love them and they don't end up as serial killers, so.
Yeah, I mean,
there's definitely something about the
Yeah,
kid.
In saying that, I mean, I
was never raised with my birth mom, and I didn't come out with one.
Yeah, and you see, that's the thing that we're seeing here. When we start getting all different perspectives, and we start getting different, and I do apologize. My whole internet did go down in my house. I'm not sure, so I do apologize. But I'm now in the call-in. But we do see that when we start looking at it from a perspective point of view, we can start pinpointing changes, but we can see patterns as well. And what we use in statistics and alone is that we use patterns to develop a statistical understanding to these events or these things. And a lot of it comes back to the fact that individuals suffered some sort of traumatic event, or what they classified as a traumatic event, and it occurred in early childhood. So that's why, like I was saying before I got cut off, we're starting to see a shift in things where we're starting to look at it from an individual standpoint, and we're not labeling. And that's like one of the biggest issues.
Is we're actually that's the perspective that the FBI used to have in the 70s and 80s, and then sort of abandoned that in the 90s. And it's interesting that you say that they're circling back to that.
Oh, right, wow. And that's what we're seeing. They're actually, what we're seeing is because a criminal is only considered a criminal when criminal activity occurs, right? So the actual individual is going through an emotional, whatever, traumatic, whatever it is, but they're going through some sort of mental turmoil that is creating them to make decisions based on their cognitive understanding to things, right? So it's like the other day, me and my husband went to Dunkin' Donuts, right? And I guess my car was a little bit further off to the side. So instead of the individual letting us move to get out of the space, not parked, but how you have where you could drive in and out of a driveway in a sense. No, instead he pulls up in front of us, flips us off, curses us out, and then drives past us and goes to the opposite entry to the plaza. And you see, when we start seeing behaviors like that, you think you have a certain amount of time to react to a situation, right? So you think, okay, so now if I engage this individual by flipping him back off, because, technically that's what you all want to do, and what I wanted to do when he flipped me off for no reason, I'm like, well, what's wrong with you? I didn't do anything. I was the passenger, and you're flipping me off too, But when we look at this, this is what we're seeing. It's an issue in the cognitive and reasoning in these individuals that they are not, we're not seeing that pattern. We're seeing different patterns because there's different understandings that these individuals have. Some of them, like I said, are highly intellectual. Like Ted Bundy, for instance, it was a very, very, very intelligent man. So was the shoe bomber. These individuals have skills. So then we see cognitive reasoning along with intellectual reasoning being involved. But then we got to look at it to the extent of not an umbrella. We got to look at it to the extent of a perspective. So there's many perspective approaches we can take on individuals, but the key component in the biggest pattern that I see in all these situations is that mental health awareness really was lacking in the 70s and 80s and early 90s. So that's why we started seeing a shift in patterning these events, because we started seeing a shift because we started better understanding that, hey, wait a minute, this is, many people who have had traumatic events became serial killers than individuals that didn't. So we're seeing the switching, and that's the good thing about science. Science is constantly rapidly evolving, and we're seeing that applied science to the field of psychology, to the field of criminology. So it really comes to the point of, yes, these can be, relatable factors that we all can relate to and understand that has contributed to these psychoses or these understandings. But in the same sense, what is actually going into in the mind of that individual? Do they want to do it? Is that what it really comes down to? A lot of the times, and I heard you guys mention before I got on, they get this euphoric feeling. Now, they don't really climax the way you would when you're engaging in sexual interaction, but they climax in a whole different way. So now, is it because they're adrenaline junkies? And now that goes into more of, the actual fact of enjoying what you do. That's their work. You know what I mean? So one of the shows that I watch is called Dexter, and Dexter is a forensic psychologist or forensic some way or whatever. But he goes after the bad people because the bad people did something wrong, but then he feeds his desire to kill people. So he writes it off as being okay because, well, they're bad people. They did bad things. So, you know what? They should, he should get rid of them. So when we look at it from that aspect, we start seeing different perspectives and different objectives these individuals have. What is the objective that they're shooting for? Do they want fame and glory? Do they want a number count? Do they want to get a euphoric rush? Do they, so we start seeing it. So when we look at a mind of a serial killer in general, there's so many different perspectives. And a serial killer only becomes a serial killer and, in criminology. In psychology, they become a troubled individual who's suffering from a psychosis that needs to be addressed. So when we look at it from different point of views, it's really hard to justify what actually consummates the mind of a serial killer and what we see going forward in their actions. Because a lot of times subjective thoughts go into subjective behaviors. So were they subjected to this form of harassment, torture, abuse, neglect, whatever it is, this is why they're subjectively behaving this way and now doing it to the next person. So it's really a really interesting topic, and we can discuss it, in detail. We can discuss it in theories. We can discuss it in so many different ways. But when people try to dissect a mind of an individual who has a pattern of both criminal activity, deviant behaviors, psychoses, social, isolation issues, we see all of this stuff. We see that with normal patients on a day-to-day, but they're not serial killers. So it's really interesting what you guys were saying before I hop back on, and I just wanted to address a couple of those things because, like I said, they were really, really interesting and intriguing on the way that it was being put forward. But like Katie said, sometimes we see it for different reasons, and like you were saying, we see it from a psychological psychologist, clinical psychology understanding, and then we see it from a criminal understanding. So when we look at it,
there's a place where those two understandings meet with this diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder, which is considered a psychiatric disorder, but there's no known medical treatment. The intervention that's recommended is incarceration. So it's essentially
Exactly. And
a description
rehabilitation.
of, well, yeah, I do over time, but there's not that much sort of optimism for people with this, unfortunately. But there's evidence that they do get better depending on how old they are and how long the incarceration is. But you know, I'm looking at the criteria right now, so I could tell you that any serial killer theoretically would confirm this definition, you know, of
Right,
a personality
exactly.
profile. So would it be all right if I read this list?
Absolutely.
Sure,
That's
go
fine.
ahead.
Go ahead.
All right. So this is the diagnostic. This is how you diagnose antisocial personality disorder. So it's a pervasive pattern of disregard for and violation of the rights of others occurring since age 15, as indicated by 3 or more of the following. Failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors, as indicated by reportedly performing acts that are grounds for arrest. So the person has to continuously engage in illegal activity regardless of whether they're caught or not.
Right. Right. And,
That's
see, and that's
one
the thing.
criteria.
And that's actually a newer
Yeah.
definition and a newer criteria. And this is what I was saying. So the DSM is constantly evolving to better equip individuals to help people in this particular category. And that's what we're seeing, you know, and a lot of people, again, stem these behaviors to oppressive situations, whether it's systematic oppression
Yeah,
through
definitely.
adoption. Right, and we're seeing a pattern. So a lot of the old work does correlate with the new work, but there was never a label for it. You know, we can throw labels on everything and anything just to suffice what our understanding is. But are we truly taking and incorporating that individual's mental health from the point of the first notable moment where we saw a shift in these individuals' behaviors?
Right.
And
I know, I
technically,
agree
we're
with
not.
No,
Yeah,
I
and
agree.
technically, we're not. You know, and that's what it really comes down to. Is the fact that, you know, a person's mind in general is very fallible, right? And it's feeble. Okay, so a person's mind is very feeble and fallible, and we use it as an instrument in our lives. We use our mind as a tool to help us get through this so-called life, right? But in the same sense, when we're doing this, we're constantly making mistakes. We're constantly, you know, not understanding what we're doing either to the fullest effect. So, like I was saying with that gentleman who put me off, if I would have engaged that gentleman and gave him that response, that could have created a bigger situation. You know what I mean? So when we start noticing these erratic and quote unquote non-normal behaviors, the other part of it is that we're engaging these behaviors and how we're engaging them. And that's the other thing. So when a parent writes off a child for shooting a cat as he's just a little boy, he didn't know better. Well, I'm sorry. He must have knew something in order for him to do this. What was the understanding behind that thought of shooting that cat?
Yeah,
did
no,
they
shooting a
want
cat is
to harm-
objectively pathological and sick. I mean, there's no,
Right. So we
you know.
start seeing. Right, exactly. So we start seeing these pathological behaviors, but because individuals do not study the mind and its, you know, and its processing, we start seeing where mental health starts to derail. You know, we see it where it's being constantly neglected in many ways.
Look, I got
neglected.
sorry to interrupt, but I got to run in a second. I just wanted to say
thank
for having
you.
me on.
No,
And-
thank you for calling. And if you want, you could definitely shoot me a friend request on Facebook, and we.
Thank you for coming by, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel.
You're very welcome, Christopher. I'm happy to anytime if you.
You've
want
been
me
my
back.
friend for a while, and it made me happy you joined.
I was happy you invited me.
You have
So
my
till next
deepest
time,
respect. You're a
enjoy.
smart guy.
thank you for your time, Daniel, and giving us a different perspective on things. And that's what we do here on the show. We try to do it in the most unjudgmental, unbiased fashion, so that way somebody out there can learn something, whether it be me, Christopher, or someone listening. So it's really important that we continue to keep an open mind when discussing anything in general and keep that communication to a positive note. So thank you, Daniel, for taking the time to discuss this with us.
I was just going to mention too, I'm actually, I don't know if people know, well, people who know me well enough know that I'm a country bumpkin from Australia. But I'm actually also from the very town, I'm from the very town of the most gruesome, infamous murders of Australia. Believe it or not. So here goes. I was brought up in the country. 500 people lived in the town. I lived on the main street. And in that main street, back in the old days, back in the 90s, there were was the old banks that used to be there. Back in the days when banks actually had vaults that you could see behind the counter, those type of days. I mean, it was just a country town, so I mean, who knows? But back in the days when banks used to be attached to buildings where the living quarters of where the bank manager would used to live, I don't know if it resonates the same in America, but it's definitely in Australia. And it was known infamously, and they made a movie about it. It's called The Snowtown Murders, if anyone wants to look it up. And it was 12 barrels were found in an old bank vault. The bank was long gone, and somebody had hired out the building itself, plus the residents behind it, or attached to it, I should say. And the motive behind that was completely unclear. But what I will say is that the killers were led to believe that the victims were pedophiles, homosexuals, or just weak. And if you go and look at the movie, if you want to go look at the movie, I suggest have a strong gut, because these guys, it was a trio that did it. They would kill people, and then they would put them into a barrel of hydrochloric acid to get rid of the evidence. Well, when the evidence was found, the bodies had not quite disappeared, and some bodies were buried in some backyards all over my hometown of Adelaide. Now, it's really, really funny, because when I lived in that town, the news actually broke, and I was moving to the city to Adelaide literally the next day. So I'd kind of said my own goodbyes to my schoolmates and that back then, and I probably would have been 11 years old, and I heard a whole heap of stories that went with that. But what's even more interesting is that 6 degrees of separation. My uncle's girlfriend at the time, her brother had been missing for 2 years. They actually found him in one of the barrels. So it was really, really interesting. The town shortly, for a good while, had a tourist. It became a tourist attraction. I don't know why. People just, they made key rings and mugs and all sorts of stuff. I've been to Snowtown and survived. But it became very, very infamous. It was all over the news. I don't know if it made it to the United States, but it certainly did all over Australia. But here's the thing is that, and the reason why I say, if you're going to go watch the movie, just be very, very careful and have a strong gut, because these guys were not only torturing, they were also cannibals. So if you're talking about heinous criminal activity in regards to serial killers, you're going to see a hell of a lot. The other most infamous murders that you would have seen made into a movie based on a true story is Wolf Creek. The reason why I bring that up is because Wolf Creek was just about, the people, the victims itself was basically in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, the perpetrator happened to be someone that just liked weapons, and somebody who would ultimately his MO was to make it look like that there was a problem, say, i.e. a car broke down, need some help, bring it back to my place and I will fix it up for you. Ultimately you're screwed up, and you are either, they're not even sure if they were drugged, but one thing led to another and you're tied up or you're imprisoned. Now, the reason why I kind of brought up the good upbringing, the bad upbringing earlier, is because I wanted to show the difference between somebody that had a good upbringing, then went into violent or criminal activity. The perpetrator of Wolf Creek, the original, not the movie itself, but the actual perpetrator that plays the Wolf Creek, based on a true story kind of guy, he had a love for weapons, so he wanted to test them out. He was an average guy, didn't have any problems whatsoever with life or anything in general. You were plucked out because you were completely just besotted with testing things out. But the other thing is too, in his adult life, and here's where it runs into some issues. In his adult life, he decided that he had he played victim to his own insecurities, and which led him to criminal activities like rape, which he actually said he was not guilty for, and completely 7 times he tried to appeal his case. But the thing is that you have 2 perfect examples here, what you're talking about, Amanda, and that is the traumatic upbringing. Then you have the other story that I'm telling, which is basically you having a normal childhood, no emotional problems that stand out, and yet you have someone that gets involved in criminal activity who leads on to more criminal activity as an adult. And there's no prior recognition that there is any mental disorder or mental anything. There's no psychological problem beforehand. So, and that's where there's a fine line. I mean, I tell these examples because I don't want people to concentrate on the traumatic upbringing. Yes, all of us has 95% of the world has a psychosomatic problem. Our ability to handle it, our resilience to handle these things, is what defines us as human beings. Now, I don't want to sit there and say, hey, well, you had a good upbringing and therefore I can't see you as a serial killer or a homicidal person. But I also don't want to discount those who have gone through trauma, who have legitimate psychological or emotional issues that they're dealing with, and then lead on to criminal activity afterwards. Do you get what I'm saying?
What's going on?
We can't hear you, Amanda.
Somebody's breaking up.
Sorry, I'm having internet issues. Is this better?
Yeah.
Yeah, you said a minute.
Sorry. Sorry. But no, what I was saying is this is what I was trying to bring up before I got cut off, is that that's a work that strictly studies a certain pattern and a certain chain of events. It doesn't study it from a perspective point of view, and that's the other that's the other part that we're missing. There are many different perspectives on these particular situations. You know, a serial killer is only considered a serial killer when it's a constant chain of killings. They go on a killing spree, you know, and that's why they're called a serial killer. A lot of them adopt patterns. Some of them, you know, have a particular way of doing it. Others, like you mentioned, just really have an enjoyment for self-harm and harming people and conflicting things like that. So that's the thing. We have to look at things from a perspective point of view. We can gather all the information on prior serial killers and modern day serial killers and things like that. But the thing is that we're not taking the most important thing into accountability, which is the mental health of individuals, the understanding of labels, the understanding of oppressive situations. We have to incorporate everything from point A to point B. Was there, because of the fact that these individuals grew up in a loving, caring home, had everything they want, was it the fact that they were neglected? And that's the thing that we're missing. We can't really have a whole picture when people choose to leave certain things out. And that's the thing. So it really is a really interesting topic, and it really dives into different forms of psychology. Psychosis, sociopath, antisocial behaviors, deviancies. We see that across the board. But and that's what I was, like I said before. The mind itself, in general, is very feeble and fallible. We make choices that we consider mistakes. But what happens when those mistakes we actually like to do? So these individuals were taking part in killings, raping, whatever they were doing in Adelaide. When did it become a point where it became enjoyable to them? And that's the thing. A lot of times they act on this euphoric feeling. We see that in many different forms of abuse. It's the power over people. They're taking that power from you. And we see that. And so that's the thing. We have to look at it from a very perspective point of view. And when I say perspective, we have to take different perspectives in account when we are doing this type of research or work. Now, back then, like I said, there was a big shift in the way they address these things. We're seeing constant changing in things like the DSM. We're seeing constant changes in the way that we conduct criminal investigation. And that's the important part. Is, are these things avoidable? Yes, some of them can be. But if an individual is set on, partaking in an action, and then they do it, then it becomes premeditated. So what was the point where it became premeditated? What was that driving force? So there's a lot of psychology that goes into this study, right? There's a lot of different sciences that go into this particular study. And the reason why a lot of the times these serial killers were caught was it was a pattern, a chain of events that linked them to these crimes. Did they know this person? Oh, they left their markings or whatever the case may be. So that's what I'm saying. When we look at the mind is such a big web. And for us to say that we know what consummates a serial killer is really far-fetched, because we really don't, because then there are cases like you mentioned, Katie, where individuals supposedly lived a normal life and then partook in these crimes. But then, is it really normal for them to partake in them? No, it's not. So now it becomes a psychological thing. So it's constantly ping-pong in between the two, so it's really hard to justify their behaviors. But in the same sense, we can have a somewhat understanding to the mind of a serial killer. And that's what it is. The perfect recipe, they're saying, for a serial killer is poor connection, understanding, traumatic events or experiences, lack of interpersonal abilities, and lastly, the lack of mental awareness. And this is what becomes the perfect recipe in the making of a serial killer. So it really is one of these topics that, honestly, the only way we're going to get a perspective on is if we take each and everybody that committed these crimes and we develop a statistical pattern. And that's what we rely on, because it's data, it's information. But then when we look at it, we start saying, okay, well, they're just alike. They're just alike. There's a pattern. No, that's where we're wrong. They're individuals. And we got to take into account their individuality as well as their past traumatic experience or non-traumatic experience that occurred throughout certain developmental stages of their life. Because this is where they're saying that this is when individuals have that cognitive shift that we were talking about earlier in the show. So it's one of those things that it's violence in no way, shape, or form is okay. But it's one of those things where we really need to start focusing on mental health awareness in general, across the board. So when we have a bully in school, is that bully our next serial killer because they're partaking in torturing, abuse of their fellow peer? No, a lot of people are bullies that turn out to be normal individuals later in life. But see, this is what we're seeing. So it's really one of those things, like I said, that we have to look at it from a perspective point of view. When we look at John Wayne Gacy was a pedophile. And he would harm, maim, and unfortunately kill children. There also was, that I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Nightmare on Elm Street series. Well, there actually was a person that they based those movies on. There was an actual serial killer that they based those movies on. If you guys want to go take a look at it, you definitely can look it up. These are yes movies, but it depicts a serial killer in a different fashion.
And there's even a nomenclature for the type of treatment to suppress REM sleep and the medication. That is real too.
But then that is true actually. But then we also got to look at it from what Chris was saying, from a medication point of view. A lot of pharmaceuticals out there, if you read the label, state it can cause shifts in cognitive awareness. It can cause suicidal ideation. So that's the other thing we're seeing. We're seeing that sometimes we're treating these individuals for one thing, but we're causing a whole new issue. So we really have to look at it from a perspective point of view. But is there anything else you guys want to throw in there?
This has been an amazing show, and I'm very happy I had my friend on here.
No, it definitely is a very, very amazing show. And, we thank all of our listeners for their support and sharing and liking what we do. It really is a lot of work that we put into our shows to bring you guys information. We look up statistics, we look up documentation, we look up scientific backings, we look up, like Katie was saying, the history of her town and the serial killer who pretty much...
Yeah, you should really go check out that movie. If you've got a stomach for it, go for it. But if you don't, because 50% of the people that actually did see the cinema release ended up fainting. They were carried out by paramedics. That's what I'm saying.
What's the name of this movie?
Just have a really strong gut for it.
Send me the link.
I'll see if I can find it, and I'll send a link soon. But I did put up in the chat what the movies were. Most people, that was international, so I know most people would know Wolf Creek 1 and 2. There's 2 movies made about it. Not sure which one I think I like, but both of them were equally okay. But the Snowtown Murders, yeah, I know all about it. I haven't actually watched the movie myself. And of course, I'm not promoting it, but I'm going to tell you what the movie is. The only reason why I didn't watch it is because I know all about the story. I also know I used to live there. I know somebody personally, one of the victims. So, I went through a couple of years where I used to tell people when I was living back in Australia of this whole scenario, and people used to say, "Well, are you a murderer?" I'm like, no. But you see, the thing is that it became a tourist attraction, just like, because, and that's why it became one of the most infamous murders of all time. I mean, forget about Ned Kelly for a second. That's another infamous murderer as well. Another one was Chopper. Chopper was a guy that just was irritated by everything, and he'd have his shotgun and he'd shoot you.
Right, and then you have individuals like Herb Baumeister, who would actually go to bars intentionally to meet males and bring them back to his home and partake in erotic asphyxiation and drown his victims and asphyxiate them as well. And then when we look into where I grew up in New York, and one of the infamous killers there was the son of Sam. And I remember my parents telling me stories that while they were dating, this guy was roaming the streets. Come to find out, he didn't live far from where we lived. So, I mean, when we look at it, we really don't know everybody the way we think we do. That's why, like I said, it's really important to promote mental health awareness, to promote perspective thinking. It's just crazy how you had another one who was named Finch was his last name, and he actually, one of his victims almost got away, but the police officers handed the victim right back to him because he claimed that was his boyfriend and he was on drugs. And this was like in the 70s. No, actually, this was probably anywhere between the 50s and 70s. I don't remember, but it was later. It was one of those dates where people didn't really have a clear understanding to things like this. But he murdered and ate and partook in cannibalism to these individuals, these young boys. And he was somebody's next door neighbor, and he was the nicest man in the world, except for when he was doing his dirt. So that's what we have to look at,
Well, see, that's why I brought up all the scenarios that I brought up, because I can't say, and in more particular, I said psychology is evolving. You cannot just come up with a straight MO. There are patterns, yes, but not MO. The MO itself on each is individually catered for that individual perpetrator. It's not,
right.
I could be the nicest person in the world, but you don't know who the hell I am.
Right, exactly.
Nobody does.
And that's why it's important that we keep making these advancements. That's why it's important that we keep evolving. We need to start straying away from labels and start straying away and start going toward the why. Why did this individual, what did this individual, we got to look at it from so many different perspectives. And that's, and the DSM is a great tool. It is a great tool. I actually had the chance to use it a few times. It is a great tool, but it is a tool at the end of the day. So we really need to take time to understand our patients and understand what we're doing, you know what I mean? And that's why it's really important that we keep evolving. We really need to start opening better communications. And that's why, like I said, we do this show so we can open up these communications, so we can start learning something from one another, because we are each other's biggest allies in the fight against things like mental health awareness. We need to go and try to help these individuals that we are neglecting because we don't see every sign that's been classified in a book, or we don't see a pattern that was done prior. So this is why perspective approaches is great. So in conclusion, pretty much for this whole show, a person's mind, like I said 3 or 4 times, is very feeble and fallible. It's an instrument used throughout our lives. When you add poor connections, understandings, traumatic events or experiences, lack of interpersonal abilities, and lastly, the lack of mental awareness, this then becomes a perfect recipe in the making of serial killers. So with that being said, I'm Amanda McManus. I'm sorry that I had to leave you guys for a short time while I reconnected. Technology is evolving, I guess, too. So when it does, maybe I'll get better reception. And this is my lovely host and co-host, Katie Kamara. And this is my dear friend, Christopher Wayne Fisher, coming to you live from Goddesses and devils. Please make sure you share, like, and subscribe to our show. I hope you found this topic both educational and influential in the way of helping with spreading awareness in mental health. We are all together in this, so let's spread awareness, guys.
Yeah, and
the hope
and
we
I
can help
and I
those
don't
in
want
need.
people to think that I'm in support of serial killers and all that kind of stuff.
Well,
I
that's the thing,
like
we're
to
not.
look at different sides. So like I made a point before, there's always two sides to the story. Now, and it's just a matter of perspective. Like just like opinions, we all have them, but perspective
Right.
is what allows us to learn and learn about the traits and personalities of those around us. Now, those people who are not, into looking at one's personality will never find what one's personality is. You might see Mr. Joe Blow next door. He might be the perfect neighbor, but or she might be Mrs. Bruce or something. I don't care who it is, man, woman, or child for that fact. And I'm not saying that it's a pattern behavior, but it does go two ways. Now, we can look into these behavioral personality traits and then try and intervene in a nice, comfortable setting. Or we can wait for these people to actually reach out, because the first step to change is you admitting that there is a problem in the first place. And this says a lot for people who are going through mental health conditions. Is firstly recognizing that there is a problem to begin with, and it's not all the case in everybody. Not everybody has the ability to recognize, but when approaching subjects like this, always see it from different perspectives and not your perspective. Once you start putting your own 2 cents into issues like this or situations like this, your mind becomes foggy. So you have to kind of take a step back and see reality for what it is, and then approach it with a what's the word?
Non-biased.
An unbiased approach. And that's why
Exactly.
I like being me, because I can sit on that fence. I can take that approach, whereas I can see multiple different perspectives. And I'm not like I said, I'm not in support of heinous criminal activity. But what I'm saying is that next time when you walk down the street, just think about it for 1 second. You have absolutely no idea what happens behind closed doors.
Right. Exactly. And that is 100% true.
And that is
100%
saying a lot in terms of sexual abuse, domestic violence, and child abuse.
Right. And that's why here, like I was saying on our show, that's why we choose to spread love and light and positivity, because there's just so much happening in a person's life that we don't know everything. Even if it's our best friend, we don't know everything. Even if it's a sibling, we don't know everything. A parent, we don't know everything. Our neighbor can be the next Ted Bundy, and we wouldn't even know it, because they've never given us an inclination that this was who they are. So it's really important to constantly be vigilant, understanding, open, non-judgmental. Take non-biased approaches to situations, because we might learn something, guys. Remember, we are all in this together, so please, let's spread awareness and the other thing I just in need of guidance and support.
The other thing I just wanted to quickly mention before we finish up too is that next time you walk down the street, or next time you go see your neighbor, next time you call your friend or your family member or an acquaintance for all I care, ask them this simple question: are you okay? You may just get "I'm fine" or "I'm good" or whatever. But allow and hold space for that person to talk. Whatever the hell they want to talk about. Just allow that time.
That is actually exactly what we were saying here tonight. And Katie is 100% right. We have to leave that line of communication open, and we have to, a lot of the times, be the investigator in conversations and just ask simple questions like, are you okay? So with that being said, guys, I hope you enjoyed Goddesses and Devils. We'll be back to you guys live next Saturday. We do try to, pick topics ahead of time, but we also like to keep it, what's that word, Katie?
Spontaneous?
What's that word I'm looking for? Yes, spontaneous.
Spontaneous?
So we will bring exactly. So we will be back with you live next Saturday, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So we will be spontaneous in our topic, and who knows, we might have something interesting for you. But also, guys, just so you guys know, Katie, you could please give them a rundown on servers that they can find us on. And also, guys, just want to let you know that this network does offer a variety of different shows that give different context. So please check out the Global Enlightenment Radio Network's page. You can find them on Facebook, where you can find us as well. So, Katie, if you want to let them know where we can be found, that would be
the
great.
easiest place that you could go find us and all our affiliates is on the Global Enlightenment Radio Network /affiliates. That will show all the links of the places that we are, from SoundCloud right up to Deezer to soon to be on iHeart, and so on and so forth. So go over to that page, go to the website globalenlightenmentradionetwork.com, and you can see all the affiliates. And also I just wanted to make one quick note before we do finish up the show, is that the suicide prevention line, I don't have the number in front of me to tell you what that is, but you can Google it up on your phone. Be remembered that those hotlines out there are going in for suicide prevention, or any of the mental health hotlines. You don't have to be the patient. You can be a family member, you can be a friend, you can be anything. It is a place of or a resource. If you are seeing somebody that is going through whatever they're going through, call the hotline, ask for some advice on how to approach people. Don't not intervene, but just how to approach the situation. It's not just for the victims itself, but for the people who are around. So do use those hotlines, call those hotlines up, and one day maybe you might actually save a life.
Right, and that actually that number is, so you can find this at the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It's called. Their hours is 24 hours. Their languages that they offer is English and Spanish, and I'm sure there's much more other languages that they offer. The phone number is 1-800-273-8255, and again, it's 1-800-273-8255. And with that being said, I will bid you all a good night. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope to see you next Saturday. Please like, share, and subscribe, and make sure you click that little bell so that way you know we're on. And you can always go back and catch our archives, because Katie does post them up. So in case you missed tonight's show, or you want to share this show with a friend or a family member or whomever, you could definitely find it there. You can find it on YouTube. And you can also find us on the Global Enlightenment Radio Network, like I said. So yes, I would like to wish you all a good night, and thank you for tuning in.
Good night.
Good
I'll
night,
see you next
everyone.
week.
Jumping on a trampoline, flipping in the air. I never land, just float there. As I'm looking up, suddenly the sky erupts. Flames alert the trees, spread to fallen leaves. Now they're right upon me. Wait if I'm on fire. How am I so deep in love when I dream of dying? I never feel so loved. I've been having dreams, splashing in the summer stream, tripping, I fall in. I wanted it to happen. My body turns to ice. if I'm on fire.